We are back. Yeah, I think it's been like 9 weeks, but we're back. Happy to be back. Couldn't be happier, actually. I think I heard this. If I was any happier, I would need a drug test. So we're back. I think it's been like 9 weeks or something. This one's gonna get like 2 views, but that's all right. Doing it for me, not for you. I'm actually doing it for you. Um, but I'm doing it for me and for you. Yeah, that's my bad. I posted a little tester. The first one was a tester. I was just kind of feeling the waters out. The first episode, I enjoyed it a lot. But now I've just been playing golf. I got most of the work done for my second episode, but then I got distracted, and I just enjoyed playing golf for the last little bit before I'm full time rocking. So now I'm going to be on an attempted schedule here. I'm going to try to get one out weekly. It'll be awfully embarrassing if next week comes around and there's no episode out. But, that's life. We're going to do it. I'm having fun with it. I said last week, well, I said 9 weeks ago, that I would be doing the food industry next week. If you remember, which you probably don't, last week I did a little, not last week, but I did a overview of, what I'm going to be talking about. Talked about incentives. I gave the ground explanation for incentives so we can build upon it with these future episodes, and I'm excited. So I said this week we're going to talk about the hidden incentives behind modern food. I've been researching. I had plenty of time. I read 2 books, all sorts of articles, peer-reviewed studies. So we're going to do it. Starting off with food packaging. So, as you know, we learned in elementary school, there are warm colors and there are cool colors. Things like red, orange, yellow. Those are the warm colors. The cool colors, green, blue, purple. Now, the field of food packaging has extensively studied color. These are the food scientists. And studies have been done which delve into how packaging color influences the consumer perceptions of the product. Things like emotions and your purchasing intentions. Some research has explored the relationship between packaging color and the product's attributes, because packaging is like a thumbnail to a YouTube video. Before you can taste the food, before you can smell it, before you can try it, before you can watch the video, all you see is that thumbnail. This one included. Before you click on this video, all you see is the title and the picture. You have no idea who I am, if this is going to be good, if it's going to be bad, if I'm going to be bouncing off the wall. You don't know until you click the video and you see it. So that thumbnail is very important. Same with food packaging. The food packaging is very important. I hadn't thought of this before. I don't think most people do. How important and how much work goes into the packaging. Now, I read this experiment called the water bottle experiment, and I'll leave the link to that down below. In this experiment, they did 3 studies, only 2 of which I'm covering today, but if you want to read about that third study, it's down below. Again, the only reason I'm leaving it out is because it's not really correlated to what I'm talking about, but I'll leave it below if you want to read that. But in the first study, they picked 33 subjects from a university, and they were presented with 4 bottles of water. All of them were circular shape, they were the same shape, and they all had no labels and no branding on it. Each bottle was presented with a different cap. One had a blue cap, one had a white cap, one had a black cap, and one had a red cap. That was the only difference between these bottles. Same amount of water, same bottle shape, no branding. Participants were then asked to choose their preferred bottle. You weren't allowed to taste the water, you weren't allowed to touch it. These students from this university just had to take a look at these bottles and pick their preferred bottle. Now, during prior research, these researchers found that the blue and white had the highest association with nature, with purity, and with openness and peace, good attributes. The color red was associated with excitement, with love, with compliance, and the color black was associated with more negative emotions, such as sadness, depression, fear, death. However, black also, on the flip side, was associated with luxury and quality in some scenarios. You can see this in, you know, buildings and new products. Sometimes it represents luxury. Now, the results of their experiment, this water bottle experiment, were that the blue cap had the highest preference. It was 68.9%. It was almost 70% chose the blue cap, followed by the white cap, which was 12.2%, the black cap, which was 10, and the red cap, which was 8.9. The blue bottle the blue cap, the blue water bottle cap, inspired greater confidence in the water's purity and in the sense of safety and in security, leading to satisfaction. Even though nothing was different about these water, it was probably tap water. I mean, the water was the same, but the cap made people think that one's more pure. Makes sense. Blue is a pure color. I can see myself choosing that same choice. I damn sure wouldn't choose yellow or orange. Blue is clean. So if just changing the cap color makes you think that the water is cleaner or safer, companies are absolutely going to exploit that. I mean, it costs some pennies, but it drives up sales, 70%, like I said. Study 2. Now, in this study, they used different subjects, students from the same university, but different subjects, and they presented them with 3 more water bottles, except this time they were different shapes. So there was one circular bottle, there was one square bottle, and there was one anthropomorphic bottle, which is a human-shaped bottle. Think Coca-Cola, how it's got those curves, and the small cap on the top to represent the head. It's human-shaped. Anthropomorphic means to have human characteristics. I hadn't heard this phrase before. Now, participants were informed that all the bottle had the same amount of water, and they all had the same cap. Because this was experiment 2, they took the highest preference cap from the previous study, the blue cap. So they're all different shapes, same amount of water, all blue cap. Now, this study was controlled for color, and it made the consumer base their decision solely on the bottle's shape, obviously. And as a result, the anthropomorphic bottle achieved superior preference with 72.7%. I mean, that's a huge percentage. Followed by the round, which was the 15.2%, and the square bottle, which was 12.1%. Similarly, other studies have shown the same thing, that we tend to prefer bottles and containers, or even just objects in general, which resemble a human-like shape. People tend to give human characteristics or features to other objects that they already have, or that might look human. Think drawing faces on balloons when you see them. Think, you keep a teddy bear for life, you snuggle with it, you talk to it like it's your friend. Even, random silicone objects in the kitchen, some of them just they feel right because they've got that curved shape. I know there's one, I think you use it to put sauce on chicken and turkey and stuff. It's got all those little silicone hairs on the top. I love that thing. That's my favorite kitchen object. I've never even used it, but I just absolutely love it. You just want to touch it. I don't know. It's weird, but it's anthropomorphic. Body, human shape, curves, hair on top, just like a human. It's cool. It just feels right. That's why. We are all narcissists. People love the glass Coke bottles because they have this anthropomorphic shape, which resembles the feminine appeal. It's this glass, it's curvy, it's sexy. That's what it's meant to do. It's meant to make you think those things. Which, you don't actually think that glass water bottle is sexy and it looks, but it's anthropomorphic. That's why they do that. So next I want to talk about food color, because similarly, the color of the actual food is just as important as the packaging of the food. I read this paper on the psychological impact of food color, that's the title, by Charles Spence. And this paper was done in 2015, so it's a little outdated, but the information is still relevant today. And the main takeaways from this paper are that Charles emphasizes that color is the most visually dominant feature in food or drink products. Before you smell or taste anything, color begins to shape your expectations, how sweet you think it will be, if it's still good or if it's spoiled, what flavor you predict it might have. And so when color doesn't align with these expected flavors and what you're thinking that it will have, it can lead to negative surprise and it can cause you to dislike it. think, if you take a sip of milk, but it's actually orange juice and you were expecting milk, ooh, it'll negative surprise. Not going to kill you, but it will lead you to maybe think negatively of orange juice for a little bit. So, on the flip side, color influences taste and flavor intensity as well. It's not just about it aligning with what you think it will taste like. The food color influences the intensity of the flavor as well. Over the last 50 years or so, a large body of laboratory research has demonstrated that adding more coloring to food or more often to a beverage can lead participants in a laboratory research to rate the taste and or flavor as more intense. So even if you're not adding more flavor, it's the same amount of flavoring, but if you add more color, it causes you to rate the flavor as more intense. The more intense or vivid the food's color, the more intense people will believe and think the flavor will be, even when the ingredients don't change. So in one study by J.A. Maga, it was demonstrated that adding food coloring to an otherwise clear solution had a significant effect on the detection of certain basic tastes, such as bitterness, sweetness, sourness. Adding green food coloring, for example, decreased people's detection of the sour taste, while at the same time increasing their detection for sweetness. Adding yellow coloring decreased detection for both sourness and sweetness, and adding red coloring reduced the detection of bitterness. It was also found during this experiment that the detection of salt was unaffected by the addition of food coloring, and J.A. Maga concluded that this is likely the case because salt is in so many different foods with so many different colors. Think brown pretzels, white popcorn, yellow chips, green olives. There's so many different colors that he suspects that is why we don't associate salt with a certain color. So this is marketing gold. I mean, if color alone can make people think that food is sweeter without adding any sugar, that you're going to save so much money. I mean, why you can pump up the sugar to a certain point, but then settle back on it and just add food coloring. It's a huge profit incentive that these companies have used. There was another convincing study that was done by Clydesdale et al. I can put this one in the description as well. This study found that adding color can increase perceived sweetness by up to 10%. However, interestingly, age comes into effect more than you'd think. And it's different than what I'd expect as well. Adults actually respond to this more effectively than kids, which for me is the opposite of what I would expect. Adults fall for the color illusion because they have been conditioned to do so over years and years and years. Like, so if you're eating a Starburst and your dad and you have a kid, and your Starburst is more red than his, you're more likely to think it's sweeter than what he would think. It's flipped. You're conditioned to think that. Whereas I would think that a child would see a super red Starburst and be like, wow, that's going to be so sweet, and taste it. Yeah, it's so sugary. No. The kid hasn't been conditioned to think that the red Starburst is going to be sweeter than the bland one. So to him, they're both the same. You're conditioned over years and years and years to that illusion. It's not natural, it's taught by packaging, by branding, by repetition. It's interesting. You learned that red means sweet the same way that you learned that green means go. Your kid doesn't know that yet, but you do. It's interesting. That's the incentive right there. So adults are easier to trick with color illusions because we've been conditioned over decades and decades of branding. Businesses lean right into that because the conditioning, it keeps working. In fact, I bet you this study was done by the people who are creating these products. They're probably like, I wonder how well this is working. Let's see. And then they find out, oh, adults respond to this more so than kids? Damn, that means it's working. That means we're conditioning them. I bet you they're doing these studies. If you go back and you look at the names, it's interesting, really. So now we can pivot a little bit to the business incentives. Because a business is an organism, and its only goal is to survive. It's not an organism, but it is. It's an organism whose only goal is to survive and to thrive. So the core idea of the section that I want to talk about is that the food industry, it doesn't feed people, it feeds profit. It's a business. The decisions behind what gets grown, what gets made, what gets marketed and sold, they're all driven by the incentives to maximize revenue, reduce costs, sustain growth. It's not to improve health. That incentive, profit over health, explains pretty much everything that follows. So first off, I want to talk about economies of scale. I think it's an important economic concept. You learn it in business school. But essentially, economies of scale, it refers to the cost advantage experienced by a business when it increases its level of output. The advantage arises because of the inverse relationship between the per unit fixed cost and the quantity produced. So the greater quantity of output produced, and I don't need to use big words, but the greater the quantity of output produced, the lower the per unit fixed cost and the lower the average variable cost. And all this means is that the more units you create, the more Pop-Tarts you make in the factory, the more Starbursts you're cooking up, the cheaper each individual Pop-Tart and Starburst is. And so this scales profits exponentially. If you're making 2 Pop-Tarts, 1 Pop-Tart is, it's going to be cheap, but it's going to be more expensive than 1 Pop-Tart if you made 1,000. If you bought in bulk and you made 1,000 Pop-Tarts, each individual is cheaper. So it makes total sense to follow this. In fact, in business, you'd be stupid not to not follow the economies of scale. It's how you win in business. The larger the business, the more money it saves and the more money it makes. So this represents the cost savings and the competitive advantage that bigger businesses have over smaller ones. Because one thing I was wondering going into this is, the shitty foods are so much cheaper than the healthy ones. The small businesses are charging way more than the corporations. And that's why small businesses often charge more money for goods than the bigger ones, because they don't have this advantage, this economies of scale cost advantage. That's why Amazon preaches having the lowest prices on the market, and most of the time they do, because they're the largest company. They're taking advantage of this. That's also why the crap food is way cheaper than the good stuff. You can't make as many steaks as quickly, because you can't make steak, you slaughter. So that's why it's so much more expensive than the cheap crap that they're just pumping out, because there's a lot of cost advantage there. Scaling food production and taking advantage of the concept of economies of scale, it doesn't just mean making more, though. It means making more and getting more out of what you do make. It means making food that can travel far, that can sit for a long time, and it can stay the same. This is where the incentive starts to shift away from nutrition and towards durability, aka not food anymore. If you're producing millions of units, you need time to package them. You need time to store them. You need time to ship them, to shelve them, to sell them. If your food is going bad in 5 days, the whole system is going to collapse. So then you have to ask yourself, what kinds of food work best in these giant scaled corporations, the food system, companies getting bigger, economies of scale? What foods work the best in those? It's not apples or avocados or prime rib. Unfortunately, it's the crap. It's the Pop-Tarts, it's the Skittles, it's the Doritos. Those foods that you can leave on the shelf for like 6 months, 8 months, and still buy it like it was made yesterday. This is where we get into shelf life, which is super interesting. So the length of time, shelf life, is the length of time for which an item remains usable or fit for consumption or saleable. Shelf life is crucial because it affects how long products can be stored before they become unsuitable, before you can't sell them anymore, you can't eat them anymore. If a shelf life is short, meaning it's not very long, it's only 3 days or 5 days, there's a higher risk of spoilage and thus lost profits. If the steak goes bad in the store and nobody buys it, we don't have to pay for that. They have to pay for that. So shelf life directly affects how food is produced, how it's distributed, how it's priced, what they create. The impact that shelf life has extends all the way to food safety and food quality. When perishable foods spoil quickly, fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, dairy, avocados, banana, steak, They drive up costs because of increased waste and the need for faster distribution. Not only is there the risk that it might go bad in the store and you have to throw it out and you're not getting paid for that, you're taking a loss, but also you have to get it there quicker. Think when you order something on Amazon and it's giving you 6-day shipping or 3-day shipping, if you want it tomorrow, you have to pay extra for shipping. That's not just because they want to scam you for every penny. I mean, they do want to do that, but it's because it costs them more money to get it to you quicker. They're going to have to put it on a different truck, and they're going to have to push that truck out quicker to go directly to your house. It's kind of the same idea in the food industry. If you want steak, that has to go on a special truck. They have to order, dry ice to put in crates that can insulate that. That truck has to be moving quickly. It has to get to the destination. So there are all these costs that you wouldn't have to pay for in Doritos, which you can just lollygag and get to the store whenever you want. It can sit in the heat. It can, wait 6 months and not go bad. There's all these extra costs with the healthy foods. I just bought groceries the other day. I'm trying to eat better. So I bought chicken breast and ground turkey. It went bad. I didn't cook it. Now they didn't take the loss. I did because I bought it. But, I've also got crap up here. I got candy and cookies and stuff. That stuff doesn't go bad. That's been there a long time. I'm not taking a loss there. But the healthy food, it goes bad. So obviously when steak goes bad, you can't sell it anymore. And when that happens at scale, when you're selling millions of steak and thousands of them are going bad, you're losing a lot of money due to waste. So the incentives are to go against that. You don't want to sell those foods. You can understand why these corporations are incentivized away from these foods. You have to pay more to refrigerate it on the truck. You have to pay more to get it there quicker, to keep it cool. Once you get it to the store, you have to pay for fridge space because there's a ton of shelf space. You have to pay for that as well. But there's limited fridge space. So you have to pay extra for that fridge space. So you pay extra. Fine. I paid extra for the ice in the truck. I paid extra to get the truck moving here quicker. I paid extra for the fridge space. Bam! Your steak goes bad. No one buys it. Your avocados go bad. You're taking risks that are costing you money. So it makes sense why they're incentivized away from this. It sucks. But that's where the incentives are. It also makes sense to me why these products are more expensive than ultra-processed food. Their costs, as I said, turn into our costs. There's a much higher risk with perishable foods. And to offset the potential losses from spoilage, from the truck tipping over and all the steaks going bad, sellers, they often just preemptively set the prices higher. They don't even wait to take the losses. They just set the prices higher because they know out of 1 million steaks, a certain percentage of them are going to go bad. They're going to take losses. So fresh food is fragile, obviously, but processed food lasts for months. It's got a longer shelf life. It's got more time to sell, less waste, higher profit. They just simply make more money on the crap food. After the economies of scale, going into shelf life, there's at the largest level, there's no reason not to sell the crap. So they don't care about our health, they care about profit. The companies that care about health are taking these losses, and they're selling the steak. They're paying for the shipping. But the big companies at the top, which own all the food, they don't care. So the grocery stores and the supply chains, they prefer stability over spoilage. They just do. So next, the question becomes what goes in the food? What are the ingredients? The answer isn't whatever's healthiest, as we discussed. Instead, it's whatever's cheapest, plus all of the other stuff that we discussed earlier, the economies of scale and the shelf life. This is where we get into subsidization. So subsidies, if you don't know, also known as agricultural subsidies, it's financial support given by the government to farmers to make something cheaper to grow and to produce. So this started in 1933 when the Farm Bill was passed. A little history. When the Farm Bill was passed as a part of the New Deal, it was meant to support struggling farms during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. when the economy was struggling, when farmers were struggling, they introduced this idea to help farmers stay in business so America always has food. Good idea. Subsidization is meant to support the farmers, which it did, and it still does. However, the problem with it is that it also massively distorts what ends up in our food. Again, like I talk about, it's not evil intent, it's just cause and effect. It's what incentives are. The goal of the government is to help the farmers, help them create more food to help the people so we can eat. But as an effect, way down the line, when we're not in that dust bowl anymore, or even when we were, it distorts what ends up in our food. Only certain crops are subsidized. Today's commodity crops include corn, soy, beans, wheat, cotton, various types of grain. And when looking at the USDA.gov and taking a look at farming income, you can see when looking at the cash crop receipts, which is the total revenue that farmers received from selling crops, all the money that they make from selling stuff, that number totaled $267.4 billion in 2023. Receipts from corn and soybeans accounted for 132 of those billions. 49.4% of all the money that they made in 2023 was corn and soybeans. This means that farmers are growing a lot more of these crops. 49% of what they're growing. The money they're making is from those, which means they're growing more of them. That's because that's where the money is. If you're a farmer, if the government's going to give you money to buy stuff and to grow certain foods, you're going to do that, even if you're not struggling in the Dust Bowl right now. You're going to grow those crops because they're paying for it. So you're incentivized as a farmer to grow those crops. Spend less equals make more. If the crops are cheaper, you can buy more crops for less, sell them for less. You're making more crops, you're selling more. That gets back into the economies of scale a little bit. More cost advantage. You're getting a little bit of that advantage that you'd gain if you were a huge corporation because you're saving money so you can buy more crops to grow. Farmers follow them. Everybody follows the money. So farmers follow the money and businesses follow the cheap ingredients. The incentive is baked into the system. If corn syrup is cheap and it's plentiful, it's going to end up in everything, which it is. I mean, look at next time you buy something. Look, it's got high fructose corn syrup. It's in everything because those are the cheap ingredients. So we talked about the business incentives. There's many more to be discussed, but the big ones I covered. Now I want to shift a little bit and talk about the micro incentives, the incentives in you, because as you'll find out, the business incentives line up perfectly with what's happening in your body. These two are harmonious with each other. The food industry is hijacking your biology. It is. So this is where we get into the micro incentives in you. And here I read a book, I've read two, but Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. This is written by Richard Johnson. He talks about the biology because people don't talk about genetics as much as we maybe should. Exercise, very, very important. Eating healthy, very, very important. Making healthy food so you can eat healthy food, very, very important. But genetics are a part of the discussion as well. Not the kind of thing you might think I'm going to say where I'm making excuses for you. Oh, your genetics are bad. You're going to be fat. Well, that sounded harsh. But the idea is that's not what I'm saying. Whether those arguments are valid or not, I haven't read up on this yet. There's a lot more to unpack on future episodes. But in this book, Richard Johnson says our mission, if we are to achieve better health, is to bring our environment and our genetics into better alignment. So the issue is not one or the other. It's not our environment. It's not our genetics. It's that there's a misalignment between these two. If we can align our genetics and we can align our environment, we can get healthy and maintain health effortlessly. It will be a no-brainer. We will just be healthy naturally because these things will be aligned. This is where we get into the power of fat. Because obesity is commonly viewed as being bad and as being unhealthy. It is. But not just because obesity itself is unhealthy, but because of its ties to bad metabolic health and other illnesses. Things like depression, prediabetes, infertility, chronic fatigue, heart disease, high cholesterol, Alzheimer's. I read another book Good Energy. I don't even have the cover for this one. But Good Energy by Callie and Casey Means. The main idea in here is that bad metabolic health is the main root of all these illnesses. You can't medicate it. The bad metabolic health is the issue. You have to fix that, and then all the other issues will fix as well. Cause, effect. Our metabolic processes, which are the chemical reactions in our body which convert food into useful energy, they evolved over thousands of years of being in a synergistic relationship with our environment. However, in recent decades, our environment rapidly changed. Diet, movement patterns, sleep patterns, stress levels, exposure to non-natural chemicals like pesticides. Our environment is radically different from what our body and our cells need and what they expect. In nature, obesity is not undesirable. In fact, it's planned. It allows animals to survive periods of natural disasters, famine, and drought. But we're not experiencing those things. So for us, it's negative. We'll talk about this. Emperor penguins. All right, during winter, they nest. 1 to 2 months pre-nest, they gain a lot of fat. They nearly double in size, and then they waddle inland, away from predators. The mother lays an egg, and she goes back to the sea to gather food, while the father, who fattened up, sits on the egg. And he cradles the egg for months, for a good 2 months, all while fasting. The fat he has obtained gives him not only food, but warmth during this process. It's way beneficial. Without that fat, he couldn't sit on that egg. That egg wouldn't hatch. And so by the time that the chick is born, the mother has returned. And, she will regurgitate the food that she's gathered for the child. And all works well. Being fat helped them. It helped both the mother and the father. In nature, that survival switch is a life-saving adaptation. It's something they've learned over thousands of years. In today's environment, food companies are taking advantage of that. Maybe not on purpose, but because the incentives are there. Because a hungrier and a lazier consumer buys and eats more. Another example, hibernating. Oh, I just want to say this. Emperor penguins, they're 4 feet tall. I stood up. You think 4 feet? That's pretty damn tall. I mean, that's a big penguin. Sorry, I thought that was cool. That's a big penguin. But hibernating animals, sorry. These animals, obviously, as you know, no brainer. They increase their calories in the fall. They build up fat in preparation for the cold winter, which they a lot of times just sleep through. They slow their metabolism by eating more and by using less energy. That's how they turn their food into fat. They're not using their food as energy, so it just is stored as excess fat. So in nature, being fat is advantageous. Sure, you don't want to be so fat that you can't escape if something's chasing after you. All right, but generally speaking, it's protection when there's no food, which in nature is often. This is where we get into the survival switch. So Richard's observation, the author of Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, his observation is that animals in the world, they regulate their weight tightly so that they only have a modest amount of fat. They're pretty good at regulating their weight. However, when preparing for situations where food will not be readily available, they undergo a change in biology where they become hungrier and they forage excessively for food. They don't just get fat. When they're approaching a time where there will be no food, their biology changes. They become hungrier. They lay around more so that their food isn't energy, it gets transferred into fat. It's a different process. Fat accumulation goes up, fat burned goes down, and they become insulin resistant, which he talks about further in the book, but we can't discuss everything. I don't want this to just be a summary of his book. But Richard asks, what causes this? That's funny. What causes this? First, I have to do a little brief but necessary description of sugars, because it's important. So, because glucose and fructose are the both two most commonly known sugars, but your body treats them very, very differently. They're not the same. Glucose is the body's basic fuel. Every cell can use it. Think of it quick energy. If you don't need it, insulin stores it as glycogen for later. If you overdo it, it's like empty calories. The mitochondria turns glucose into usable ATP, which is energy. Back to high school science. But fructose is different. Fructose isn't the same. Your body doesn't just use it directly for fuel. Instead, it's most commonly produced in the liver, where it flips what Richard Johnson, the author, calls the survival switch. Fructose actually signals your body to store fat, to lower your metabolism, and to prepare for scarcity. That's why fructose isn't just calories. It actually changes your biology, it changes your behavior to make you hungrier, to make you less energetic, and to more likely gain weight. Fructose changes your behavior and your biology. It's not just a sugar which you taste and go, ooh. It's interesting. Table sugar, for example, half glucose, half fructose. It's actually like 65, 45, more fructose than glucose. But high fructose corn syrup tips the scale even further in fructose's direction, which is exactly why it's such a problem. Richard believes that at least in some animals, the survival program is initiated by eating specific food with unique properties that extend beyond calories, which is fructose. So he did an experiment. Normally, if you give an animal a caloric drink, high-calorie drink, they will reduce the amount of food that they eat in order to keep their overall calorie intake the same. Like he said, the animals are very good at regulating their weight, keeping it in that Goldilocks zone. So if they drink a high-calorie drink, they're not going to eat as much. They're going to keep it in that zone. When laboratory mice were given fructose in their drinking water, they have water, they have food. When they're given fructose in their water, initially they did this. They compensated for the calories gained from fructose by decreasing their food intake, keeping it in that Goldilocks zone. However, after several weeks, this pattern changed. Not only did they continue to drink the same amount of fructose or more, but they also increased their food intake so that their overall calorie intake was significantly higher than the control group, which was just drinking water, no fructose. Essentially, they acted persistently hungry and at the same time also became far less active. They were literally laying around. So they were eating way more and they were expending way less energy. After several months, they had gained way more fat compared to the control group of mice, particularly in their abdomen, funny enough, and had developed fatty liver and insulin resistance. That idea he talks about further in the book. In contrast, the control mice remained healthy. They remained lean. Further analysis showed that the fructose drinking mice not only ate more calories overall, but had decreased their metabolism when they were at rest. So they started accumulating fat, not only due to increased production of fat, eating more, producing more fat, but because they decreased their activity in order to burn the fat. They were eating more and moving less, exactly like we see in nature. And this is very similar to the changes which we observe in society as a whole as well. Eating more, expending less energy. This is why sugary drinks are such a perfect product. Not only is it so damn good, you pump a bunch of the food coloring in it to make you think it's sweeter. Sizes of pop drinks have been increasing over years from 7 to 10 to 12. They don't just give you calories, they make you hungrier, thirstier, and lazier, so you come back for more. It's the perfect product. The incentives are perfectly aligned. So, eventually something's got to be done about this. We just have to change the incentives. Like Richard Johnson says, if our environment and our genetics are better in line, we will have no issue being healthy. But right now, our genetics, which were developed over years and years and years of living in nature, the genetics of becoming fat was beneficial to us. It's good to be fat in nature. Fructose fuels this survival switch, which benefits us in nature. But right now, it's like we're preparing for a winter that's never to come. We're preparing for a time when food will be absent, which is never going to happen. So we're eating this fructose way more than our genetics are used to. We're overriding the system. And there's no fast. We're just gaining weight. And our body's waiting. We're like, we got this. We're ready. We can go. We don't need food. But that time never comes. So that's why our environment and our genetics are misaligned. That's what we're seeing. So, yeah, that's that. I mean, there's a lot more to discuss here. I definitely will do another episode in the future because I didn't even get into some of the stuff. There's a lot more business incentives. You know, the idea that also the Rockefellers are involved in this. That they were doing cigarettes and then they sold out of cigarettes and they bought into the food industry. So that same addictive principle. It's a good product. So there's a lot more to get into. I'll definitely do another episode in the future. Next week, I think I'm going to talk about the health industry. The medical industry. It's very similar to the food industry. There will be a lot of interchangeable things. But that's what I'm going to talk about next week. The episode should be out. Hope this made sense. I'll be back. I'm having a lot of fun with this. Yeah, it's interesting. The incentives are everywhere. They're driving every single system, and we're just tapping into it. This is the first system we're covering. Food industry. Next is the medical industry. Then we'll talk about fear and loathing on the campaign trail. I don't know what the hell we're going to talk about, but we're going to get into it. I'm having fun. Thank you guys. Hopefully you're enjoying this. Hopefully it's making sense. If I'm not doing a good job of explaining things or I'm moving too quickly, I do speak fast. So I that's something I'm always working on, just talking a little bit slower. But if I'm going too quickly, I will definitely slow it down. The idea of this is I want this to be easily digestible, which this is not. I might have went a little deep with this one. A lot of the podcasts, it's experts talking to you who doesn't know shit. So it's tough sometimes to understand. So I want this to be a little bit of a middle ground where I'm discovering it at the same time as you guys. I'm looking into this stuff. I'm sharing it, showing interest because it is fascinating stuff, but it needs to be easily digestible. It needs to be understandable. So if it's not, let me know because it's very important that it is. See you next week. Health industry. Another episode on food industry coming. Likely. But after a bunch of other stuff because there's a lot to talk about. I mean, I forget my list. I've got a whole list of things to talk about. So no excuses if it doesn't come out. See you next week. Thanks, guys.